House Party is a classic 90s film. High schoolers go on the motion of identity, being seniors in high school, and just like trying to maximize their downtime in healthy ways and sometimes unhealthy ways. However, there were some depictions of colorism that I would like to discuss in the film, particularly through Sydney and Shireen. Sydney is Shireen's best friend and vice versa. And Sydney lives in a massive house with like this side exit, which I thought was pretty cool because I just didn't know many people who had like, or many teenagers who had like rooms with like a little stairs they could escape through, whatever. Anyway, in the second movie, I noticed that Sydney appeared in college, but Shireen was not there. And I'm just bringing these instances up to show like a level of class division because again, Sydney, she lives in this huge home and you see her going to college as a light-skinned actress or as a light-skinned character. Nonetheless, Sydney is also a bit timid and slim and wears oversized clothes. She is interested in Kid, but Kid does not really see her. He likes Shireen from the get-go. And Shireen is this like bubbly, carefree Black girl. Her politeness may be perceived as flirtatious, but Shireen shows little interest in guys. She acknowledges like the idea, but she's just there to have a good time. And she seems to like play, but play was obviously with like some other girls, usually like this an ambiguous girl, etc. And play was just there for a whole nother good time. And he wasn't focused on Shireen. Nonetheless, I thought it was interesting how he later would show up to talk to her after they decide to pick up Kid, offering to stop and get Burger King, which in general, I think that also was like playing on her emotions, but let's just go back. So Shireen's home life appears to be in the projects with mixed family members. She has a grandma who is unresponsive to her granddaughter's departure and an overweight uncle, unconcerned that she left, and ordering a child called Peanut to send him Kool-Aid. Now, I don't have any issues with Black families being or mixed family members in a Black household. I think that's often common. I think it sometimes shows a level of economic responsibilities and shares. But I think that this was intended to show that she was not only living in the projects, but there was a generation of like, quote unquote, lazy Black people living with her. And the fact that her uncle was intentionally overweight, I think there was stereotyping, again, Black people as lazy. To my memory, all of her family members were also like brown skin or dark skin. So in the household, it just appeared that no one cared or was responsible for the youth in the home. For instance, Shireen not really being questioned about leaving and that child being unattended and making this unhealthy amount of Kool-Aid, which was also stereotypical of Black people loving a lot of sugar. Anyway, Shireen, she easily sneaks out the house because nobody really was concerned about her. Unlike Sydney later on, who you will see, realizes that her parents are present and that Kid has to get out the house trying to get him some cookie. Despite Kid liking Shireen, again, she shows no interest after realizing that Sydney really liked him. Yet Sydney confronts her about Kid as a very entitled light-skinned friend. Ironically, it was interesting how Shireen joked about giving him some if he matured, painting her as this like promiscuous character, but she actually didn't do anything sexual in the movie. I also thought it was interesting how Bilal sought out Sydney at the party, more so specifically saying she was beautiful compared to, say, the other girls at the party. And this shows how light-skin privilege is also often equated to pretty privilege. And I'm not saying that Sydney's character wasn't pretty, but again, Sydney just had these privileges in the movie that I'm not sure if people picked up on. And one was even being acknowledged as pretty, while Shireen was like pretty much pursued as desirable, but like as a sex object. So Kid and Sydney end up being together because they both seem to not be liked by anyone else. Kid walks Sydney home and is invited in. They rip off each other's clothes, but are stopped when they don't have a reliable condom. Unlike Shireen, Sydney has present parents again and warns Kid that he gotta go so they won't be aware and confront them. And you see even Sydney's parents come into the room and check on her as she pretends to sleep. Though Sydney is allowed, again, a romantic interest, Shireen is not, even though she was presented as sexually desirable. Shireen was not sexual in the least. She wore a bright yellow dance suit that highlighted her curves and was very energetic on the dance floor. Yet in the light of colorism, I think the way their home lives, romantic interests, and even the fact that Shireen was not in the follow-up movie depicts a difference on the positive depictions of light skin privilege and the contrary. Shireen was still a good friend to Sydney and even Kid. Even at the party scene around the 49-minute mark in the movie, Kid approaches Sydney to dance. Sydney is upset because he only approached her after Shireen wasn't available. But even when Kid offered to walk them home, Shireen was a good friend and she informed Sydney. She simply said she was going to get her coat, and Sydney says, "Don't be up there all night." Not only was the girl like shady and thirsty, she was wishy-washy and implying that Shireen was a hoe. Now, Shireen was all up in Play's mama closet, admiring her clothes, which was a bit much. But Kid was pushing all up on her, and she even acknowledged it's time to go after he implied Sydney messed up the vibe. At the 1 hour, 5 minute mark, Kid even was planning to take Shireen on a date, but she politely dismissed it because she saw how salty Sydney was acting. So Shireen, she ends up showing up with everyone, with like the friend group when Kid is released from jail, and even admired that her friend was happy as the two locked lips in the back of the car. Shireen was definitely carefree, but I definitely found it interesting how she was basically casted. I just was like, why is this movie constantly insinuating that this girl's a hoe because she's darker skinned and obviously it's colorism? And I do have something to say also about Kid and Play, but let me know if you want me to talk about them in another video. And let me know like if your thoughts about the movie, if you've seen it, if you liked it. And thank you so much for listening to Books and Looks TV. I'll see y'all next time.